A lot of people don't run their businesses as a business. Even, professionals 5, 10, 20 years in kind of run it ad hoc and just on the fly.
This is Wedding DJ School. I'm Josh Mitchell. For the next 12 weeks or so, we're talking with leaders in the wedding entertainment industry. You're going to learn their backstories, how they got started, and where they are today. We're kicking off season 2 with an interview with Lou Paris. Lou's company is called Paris Creative, and he operates out of Hudson Valley, New York. I first encountered Lou on Facebook. Through the different Facebook groups, he's very active in sharing really useful advice for people, and he has a fantastic YouTube channel that I highly recommend you check out. His articles have helped me grow as a DJ, and I love his approach to equipment and redundancies and organization. I think you're going to find this interview really useful. So here he is. Meet Lou Paris.
My name is Lou Paris. I've been a DJ since way back in '88 when I was, carrying vinyl and crates, and I was hitting the school dance circuit and the college circuit. I started Paris Creative in 2012 after taking a 13-year hiatus from DJing. I spent a lot of that time focused on my IT career. And so now I'm, being in the Hudson Valley, which happens to be a big destination area for weddings. It's been a nice marriage of having my technology background with my, passion for music and being able to kind of offer that to my clients.
Awesome. I want to hear a little bit more about your beginnings. And for you, it kind of sounds like there's kind of two specific beginnings. There was your early beginnings, but then kind of when you relaunched into the game. So let's actually take a second just to look at both of those. What was it like when you first became a DJ all the way back in the early days? And then we'll talk about kind of your revamp.
Yeah, it was so much different. So of course, I was a teenager at that point. I was 16. One of my friends wanted me to essentially be a roadie. So I helped out with a couple gigs, and then eventually I just kind of migrated over to the turntables because, I had a passion for music to begin with. I had my own deep music catalog at that point. And so we just started combining our services and doing the thing. And it was a lot different back then where it was, I almost want to say, a little bit more of a fun component to it, maybe because I was just so young. It was relatively, the golden age of the DJ industry as a whole from, I would say, the late 80s going into like the late 90s, I think was kind of like that real golden age of DJing at that point. And it was just a different vibe. I was able to be a little bit more experimental with music, kind of throwing some more stuff out there than I would later on in my career. And I just I got lucky enough where my background, my parents, my sister, they listened to all kind of genres of music: R&B, hip hop, disco, rock. My grandparents with country, and it just really exposed me to a lot of different genres and a lot of different styles. And every single time I kept on hearing everything from metal to hip hop to rock to pop. I mean, I just really liked the majority of it. And when I had the opportunity to start DJing, it was like, wow, to actually make even a few dollars way back when doing something I love, and I'm still in high school. That was kind of just a real awesome feeling behind that. And eventually, I went to college. I got on to college radio at that point, started doing the lacrosse houses and other frat parties. That was a real fun component. And then kind of fast forward into the 90s, I moved into the Washington, D.C. area. Had actually started radio just before, a couple of small stations in Vermont. And I got lucky. I hit the two biggest radio stations in D.C., WPGC and WKYS, and was doing the two largest hip hop clubs in the area, DC Live and the Ritz. And it was just an awesome feeling behind it. But also back then, you just didn't make as much money as I would hope that you would, even with the radio career, even with the club career.
One of the learnings I think that we can even extract from kind of your early kind of beginnings is that idea of exposure to all the different genres. And that could be a takeaway for people today. How important is that, of just having that variety of music?
I think it's absolutely critical. Now, naturally, for some people, especially if they're in the club scene and they have their niche, whether it's EDM, whether it's trance, whatever it ends up being, if that's your niche, that's your niche, and roll with the thing. But I know for me, I always liked really mixing it up. Even when I did my hip hop sets at the DC Live in the Ritz, I would mix in a little bit of rock. I would find those original samples and throw a couple jazz samples. I throw in Herbie Hancock, and people were like, "What the hell is he playing?" And there was still groove to it for a minute, and then I would kind of come out of it. But I really liked teasing the crowd with that, and I always felt that having that knowledge and that background behind it really helped me flourish as a DJ. Now I know some DJs who are just, I'm just a ex DJ, and that's all I spin, and if that's what you like and you can find a market for it, that's great. But I really think it limits you if you're not exposed to that. And even today, I was never a super big jazz person, but I want to say in the past 3-4 years, I've been exposing myself to more and more jazz, a little bit more just experimental stuff, just to kind of keep on broadening my horizons because I don't want to stay stagnant.
Right. I love that. Okay, cool. So continue the story. What happened next?
So 99 comes. I'm in DC. I'm at the two biggest clubs. I'm at one of the radio stations at that point, and then I met my now wife, and she was just basically like, "You can't be in that club scene. You have an IT career." I've been into about 3 years at that point, all small stuff, help desk and troubleshooting. But I decided, I knew I was making a lot more money at that point, so I hung up the headphones, and essentially for the next 13 years after that, I focused solely on my IT career. I worked for the Pentagon, for the FBI, Department of Justice, from everything from security and storage to virtualization to disaster recovery. I literally wrote one of the books for the FBI on disaster recovery and continuation of operations. And, it gave me a really interesting look because I got to meet a lot of interesting people, a lot of critical environments. And I worked for a lot of businesses, small and large, that either failed or succeeded. So I got to see, people, pushing the edge, trying to push their businesses, whether good nor bad, and, seeing what the fruits of their labor or their laziness basically kind of, bore out. And I think that all this combination of things, having the music background, early DJing on and whatnot, then going into my IT career and being exposed to everything on that side. And then, seeing that business side of it, working for these small and large businesses and seeing how they operate and all that, I think that really gave me a lot of insight when I decided to start my business. And starting my business was kind of bore out of necessity. We had moved from DC up here to the Hudson Valley, and I took a massive pay cut coming up here. So I was like, where can I start looking at some additional funding? And, I remembered how much I loved DJing, and it's like, I could probably make a small career out of this. Let me see what I can do. And, lo and behold, I'm 7.5 years in now, and it's been an extraordinary journey. It's been a ton of fun, and it's very, very fulfilling in the end.
Awesome. So take me back to that first wedding that you did in those early, right after your relaunch or after your comeback. What was that first wedding like after not DJing for a while?
It was a culture shock a little bit because I had only done a couple weddings prior in my other career, just kind of like filling gigs and all that. So I was a little exposed to weddings, but never the full on planning and everything. And I knew what I was getting myself into. I did a lot of research. I looked at a lot of wedding planners, what they were putting up for capturing information and all that. So I kind of knew a bit going in, but it's just never enough when you get to those first couple events and you're just kind of thrown into it. And it was invigorating. It was frightening. It was very visceral. And ultimately, especially after that very first wedding, and the couple comes to me and it's like, "You knocked it out of the park." They were like my first review within like just a few weeks. And it was just such a tremendous feeling to be like, wow, I stepped out this long. I was able to kind of go back into it, and and I was able to accomplish something that I would have never thought just 2, 4, 5 years ago that I would have ever been back into the industry.
So that's amazing. And just that shock that you're talking about and that exhaustion, but then followed up with the, job well done at the end of the night. I totally resonate with that. That's very similar to my first experience DJing. What lessons or what takeaways in those first couple, full on, you're doing this, what lessons were you learning? And what kind of things were kind of really formative to you during, hey, I'm going to make a business out of this? What kind of stuff stands out?
So one of the first things, and I still hold true to it to this day, and actually I have a video I just shot for this, so someday it'll be up there on my channel, is to first think small. Don't think that you have to have the world, ready, tons of lights, all this equipment and everything. It's nice if you have the budget, but I started it from almost no working capital to come off of. I had a tractor controller. I rented out some speakers. I did buy some uplights because the very first gig I had required uplights. And I bought an AKG microphone. I was looking for the best that I could afford at the time, did my research. And that's the approach I always take is first, look at those investments. What do you need in the now? Do you see a market immediately for something that would necessitate the buy? So like when I eventually got into doing larger ceremonies, I kept on stepping up from that single AKG mic over to a GTD quad mic out of it, and then ultimately into my Sennheisers, knowing that the market was ripe for it. I could afford it at the time. And then I knew I would get a return on investment at some point. And I always, the ROI has to be there. The purchase really cannot be frivolous. Otherwise, I'm just basically putting my business in jeopardy at that point.
Sure. Yeah. And I even want to pause there for a second before we move on too much, because this is another theme that I'm noticing all the way from the outset for you of this idea of just being intentional with your purchases and your decisions. And some of that actually stemmed for you out of, working kind of a day job for a little while is what gave you that kind of perspective. So talk a little bit more about just that, you are running a business essentially. And I think that sometimes DJs or people, when they first jump into it, they're not necessarily thinking of it with their business hat on. They're thinking, oh, so cool, I'm making money playing music or doing something that I love. So how were you kind of thinking through that, even in the early days, kind of as it relates to making sure that your business stays ahead?
Yeah, that was the very first thing I had thought about as well. And actually, I had talked to a couple DJs before I walked into it. And, a lot of them automatically said a lot of people don't run their businesses as a business. Even, professionals 5, 10, 20 years in kind of run it ad hoc and just on the fly. So one of the very first things I did, business plan. I threw down all my markers, what my competition looked like, what my potential income was going to be, how I was going to raise my rates, just a real scope of the land, because I wanted a strategy moving forward. Now, again, some people who are especially new in the business, they might not have that business background in it. And I can't stress enough to research it. Yeah, you can kind of fly by your seat of your pants, but you could end up wasting a lot of money. You could be wasting a lot of effort. And you might be missing key markers that might either be, whether it's your niche, like one of my niches really became like advanced ceremonies, big mics, working in live production and all that. And if I had just kind of just thrown spaghetti at the wall on that, I might have missed those markers and never capitalized on that.
Yeah, and one of the things for anybody listening right now who hasn't followed any of Lou's material, we'll try to post some links in the notes here that show how he tracks everything. And I've seen some of his graphs on social media engagement and how are things looking in terms of investment on even just like your how many leads that you get per year, and noticing those kinds of trends. So that's something that a business owner thinks about. A business owner is thinking, am I getting a return on the time and the energy, not just the money, but the time and the energy that you're putting into it? And that's something that you track very specifically. So talk a little bit about that, about how you love data. You love knowing that, you're not being frivolous.
Yes, I am the big data guy, and maybe it is just my IT background and just kind of this passion to know. I want to know what my money's doing. Want to know where trends and analysis are. Matter of fact, at the time of this recording, I had thrown a trend that I saw out there where my leads were starting to dry up in a little bit. And I wanted to start to qualify that if other people were experiencing that. And some aren't. And I think there's definitely a larger trend kind of coming around, but we'll see if the data bores out. But yeah, I collect as much data as possible. And unfortunately, there's no application out there right now that just parses it on the fly. So I have to kind of export that data that I capture. I throw it into spreadsheets. I've created heat maps to kind of show, where things are going for leads, for my contracts. I know exactly to the penny how much money I've spent on advertising and what that return on investment is per cost of lead, and then per acquiring that person, making them into the contract. I dissect all that data because I want to know what's going on with it. And sometimes, looking at the data, you can kind of get a little, eyes are bloodshot and you don't know what to make of it. And then like a month down the road, it's like, oh, I just need to kind of look at this data in a different way. And now it kind of makes more sense. So I've always been this data junkie. Give me as much data as possible. And whether I can parse it out today or tomorrow, I'll find some way to make some use of
Yeah.
it.
And I think that's so important for people who are maybe just starting off or they're in those early days, that you can take the time to just step back, and it doesn't have to be super complicated. This doesn't have to be rocket science, but I heard somebody when they were talking about data recently saying if the numbers are under 100, use a clipboard and a pencil and just try to track what's going on, because you're going to get a more accurate and a better picture of your progress than if you just keep throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that it sticks. And that idea that
Absolutely.
hope is not
Absolutely.
a strategy, and that's I heard that from a friend. Hope is not a strategy. You just can't do things and go, oh well, I hope this works. But that you at least have some kind of system to follow up. So Lou is the guy. If you were looking for somebody, look at just some of the stuff that he's put out there in the different DJ groups and stuff, just because he has kind of shared how he tracks some of these trends. And I think what we can learn from that is wherever you are, like I'm not a huge math guy on my own, but I know how important it is to make informed decisions. And so it's going to look a little different for me than it does for Lou, and it's going to look a little different for you. Wherever anybody listening right now, wherever you're at in your journey, it might look a little bit different. So I love that example that you set, Lou, in terms of just tracking things and making sure that you're making good informed decisions. Any other thoughts that you want to say on that before we move on?
I think the biggest thing, and I think you kind of nailed it, whether you're tracking on paper, even if you're doing it on a spreadsheet, whether you're invested in one of the many sort of good applications, but sort of bad applications that are out there to capture as much information as possible. Because again, 2 years down the road, you might be like, oh, I invested in Wedding Wire and I didn't have this correlation of the data where I had 100 leads and maybe 4 of them converted. Well, having that knowledge 2 years down the road might make your decision whether you want to continue investing in it or not. So start now, whether it's the most rudimentary side of it, throwing in a spreadsheet or a piece of paper, or going into one of these applications, or maybe when my application finally ever gets out there, invest in mine. But capture the data, because eventually that data will make sense.
Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about equipment for a moment. And my question about equipment is really for the person who's starting off right now and they feel like they need to, purchase the really cool, line array style speakers, or they want to get something big that the other guys have. What advice? I noticed that you said that when you first kind of revamped, you rented, but just talk about like, where should somebody in the early days of their career be thinking in terms of equipment?
Yeah, it's going to come down ultimately to what that DJ is going to be presenting as their solutions to their, whether they're couples or if they're doing bar mitzvahs, whatever it ends up having to be. But let's say we're focusing on weddings for the moment. Are you going to ultimately want to do more on the ceremony side? Are you more critical about how things sound? Do you have an issue with being able to load stuff in, like you can't carry a lot of weight, or your vehicle is really small? Those are the questions that should dictate what you ultimately want to look at. I see all the time on the forums, oh, hey, I'm looking for some new speakers. What's the best brand? That's not the question that you should ask. And whether it's speakers, microphones, whatever it is, first start thinking of your use case. If you are right now thinking you're coming into the business and you have nothing, well, of course, you got to have some of the basics. And right now, you probably should look at a rental side. Maybe invest in a relatively inexpensive controller to buy, so that way it's there, you can practice and get all that in. But then look at renting other pieces like your speakers. If you need to rent lighting, rent some lighting. You don't always have to have lighting at a wedding. I'm proof of that. 80% of my events do not have lighting. And just look at the necessities and gauge each time. And then as you start to grow, start to see where those trends are. So like I said, when I started seeing that I needed more than just a single AKG microphone, I really wanted a Sennheiser Shure, 2, 3, 4 mics, but I knew I couldn't afford it. So I went the GTD route and it got me by, but I knew exactly where things were going to go. I knew where that focus was going to be. I knew where my budget was going to be. I knew that after 3 or 4 weddings that it would be paid off and everything would be profit at that point. So that way I can start investing to another and always keep on looking ahead. If you're looking at intermediate steps, what is that next milestone before you invest into the next thing? So kind of really prioritize where you think things are. Don't think pie in the sky. Don't think you got to go have some Evolve 50s, as awesome as they are, and I own 3 of them. They're not necessary. You can get, $500, $400, $600 speakers, and they will definitely suffice. They may not be the highest quality, but they're definitely good enough to get you through to the next step. If you really, really don't want to buy into it, rent it until you get to that point where you know that you can buy it and your return on investment will be there, just a few events afterwards. So just think smart, lay everything out, and think the whys before you buy.
I like what you said about lights, and you are proof of a guy that doesn't do a whole lot of lights. I mean, we see sometimes in these photos that people post, they've got 6 moving heads, they've got up lights everywhere, and it's like, and they're charging, similar to what I would charge without that, and just kind of talk about that a little bit, about how you've gained confidence in not needing to supply absolutely everything to everyone.
Yeah, and I think, and this is the niche that I kind of fell into and it was funny because when I started Paris Creative was actually my web design business from 2001. Matter of fact, it was around this time, what was it, almost 18 years ago, where I started Paris Creative, my design company. So that was on mothballs, and I was thinking of a business name, and I thought Paris being, DJ, there's my name, Paris, and the creative being the lighting side. And sure enough, after 6, 7 events, I had lighting as an option out there for all my clients, and all of them were like, no, I don't want any lighting at all. And even though I had that one gig that had uplights, and I bought corded uplights, definite huge mistake. Oh my God, what a nightmare trying to set those up. And I knew I couldn't afford the battery powered lights at the time, so I did what I need to get by. But ultimately, I really started seeing this pattern where my couples were really more focused on the music side. Now, that is not going to be necessarily for every DJ. And definitely there's some DJs who are more passionate about lighting the music. And if it is, do your thing. That's where your niche is. Definitely focus on that. But, I've seen time and time again where lighting for a lot of my clients is just not even an option. They like the ambiance of the venue. They rather focus on the music side of the equation than the pop and circumstance side of the equation. And again, this is not to say lighting's bad. Matter of fact, I just literally today opened up some Nova Pro totems, and I'm getting some Intimidator heads for a couple events because I know that's where some of my clients are really going to. But I've already invested so much. I've got my rate of return on my 4-bar and my gig bar that I've had for years, and I've only broken out a couple dozen times at best. And I've got my return on that. Now I can go my next step, but I know that this isn't a waste because this will be used just nowhere near as often as some other people will be. But you do not have to have lights. Some clients abhor lights, and some want it really bad. So it just really depends on your market and where you are mentally on that.
I love what Lou just said about figuring out your market, figuring out where you're going to be in terms of offering solutions to your customers' problems. And I don't want you to miss this because it sounds simple or it might sound obvious, but you'd be surprised. This idea of problems and solutions is actually pretty deep. It's actually pretty complex. And if you explore it a little bit more, take some time just to think through this, write some things down, you can figure out your area, your market, and how you're going to solve those problems. And it's actually going to grow your business. It's going to allow you to be more profitable. And that's really one of the secrets of having a profitable business, is that you don't have to solve every single problem in the book. You get to design what specific problems that you're going to solve. So we're going to continue our conversation with Lou next Friday. There are so many more takeaways. We had to split this one into 2 parts, and I don't want you to miss the gold that's going to help you learn and grow. But we don't want you to forget about us. You can find us at weddingdjschool.com, or you can text weddingdj to 44222. And if you send us your email address, we will send you a comprehensive checklist, recommended resources, advice on what to do with contracts, and so much more, all for free. Just text Wedding DJ to 44222. Thanks so much for spending time with us today. We will see you next week as we talk with Lou about pricing, value, and how to have confidence in what you charge.